Over my years of doing art, I've tried many different colors and styles, and one thing that's always hard to get right is color. Even if I can get the right proportion or perspective, the color would still be off. But there was always one way of putting down color that no other brush could quite do the same. And when I first found it, that was really the point that I began to get a lot better at understanding light and color. And that brush is the airbrush, or just any brush that's very soft or has a large fall-off radius. But it's not as simple as just using it. Actually, when I first got into digital art, I really didn't like it at all. I think it's very easy to misuse it. Like, I've seen a lot of people just shade things by doing something like this. That is not a good way of using it, and it just ends up looking like some cheap clip art or something. You have to make sure you don't go over it once, but instead keep adding on like a real paintbrush or pencil. I find it works the best in the beginning. Once you have more detail in a picture, going back with an airbrush will cover up stuff, so try to use it early on. I often will even start a picture with it, or some sort of smudge brush that's similar, just to really get that good gradient. For example, with this picture, I wasn't yet happy with the color. I kind of wanted it to have this nice golden light, so I just kept going over it with different colors with the airbrush. Not really thinking about it too much, just adding colors that seemed right, like different oranges and yellows, playing around with different darker tones like browns or violets. Really just mixing a lot of different colors together. Even if the color seems odd, like using a green or a purple in bright sunlight, it will get mixed in with the gradient and it might turn out looking really nice. If you keep playing around with it, I find it always seems to work out, and that's not something I've been able to get with other brushes. Really, I think the reason I like it so much is because it forces you to only focus on the color. I mean, you're not going to be making small details or stuff with it. It's just way too soft for that. So it forces you to only think about the color. It also makes really good gradients. With a lot of other brushes, you really have to make an effort to get smooth transitions, but with this, it just blends them all together well. It's also good for beginners or people who just don't want to think about getting colors right. I mean, getting accurate lighting is kind of hard, and oftentimes just doing something that looks good is better than trying to copy real life. I mean, I know real life can look good and all, but sometimes nature just doesn't do it right, and it just needs a bit more color in places. When I was getting into digital art and figured out how to correctly use the airbrush, that was really the thing that made me improve. Like, even if I had no idea how to get the lighting on this grass to look right, just by putting down colors that seemed vaguely like they'd work, I'd always be able to get something that looked decent. At least decenter than if I had tried to really calculate the exact colors and the way the lighting would bounce off of everything. Also, this kind of effect with the gradient of the colors is actually something that happens in real life. Like, if you look at a light or a contrast between colors, it's not super visible, but there is a large radius around where the colors slowly transition. Another thing that I like to do sometimes is just add a bit of color around the edge of something. This might seem a bit odd, but turns out this is another thing that happens in real life as well. And this is known as chromatic aberration. And if you look very closely at something, you'll notice that there is a faint kind of blur of color between them. I've actually noticed some games adding this effect, as it can simulate a more realistic look. It's also the thing that gives that old VHS effect. Now, of course, everyone's style is different, and there are definitely many styles that just couldn't work with an airbrush. But if you're going for something more painted-like or with more realistic lighting, then I recommend fiddling around with an airbrush. It might take a bit to figure out how to use it correctly, but it can definitely really help in the right places.